tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
James Dean is one of the greatest icons of the 20th century.
Up until that moment in time, grown-ups set the styles.
Stand up!
Suddenly, Jim was king.
I thought he was cute and funny and talented and wonderful and the most amazing person that I'd ever met.
But his story has been told and retold so many times that the truth has been nearly obscured by rumors and speculation.
I think he was an angel, not a human being.
Underneath the layers of the James Dean legend lies Jimmy, frozen in time as the ultimate teenage rebel.
No, I don't want a little share. I want the whole thing.
People were just starting to discover who he was, and then he was gone.
James Byron Dean was born in Marion, Indiana on February 8, 1931. His parents, 23-year-old Wynton and 20-year-old Mildred, had rushed into marriage and were still adjusting to the idea that they were a family. When Jimmy was a toddler, they moved to Wynton's hometown of Fairmount. Mildred stayed home, doting on the boy, while his father worked as a dental technician.
Wynton Dean was a very inarticulate kind of man who found it very difficult to express his emotions or show any enthusiasm. Jimmy spent an awful lot of time trying to curry his attention, affection, and etc. And although it was there, it was always hidden.
Unable to make much of a connection with his father, Jimmy grew closer to his mother. Mildred saw his strong creative streak and nurtured it.
He liked to draw, he liked to paint. We've got a lot of watercolors that he did and some pastel drawings and stuff from a lot of his school project. He was a very good artist and liked to express himself in drawing things.
Jimmy was smothered in attention by his mother, reading aloud and playing games with her, and the two loved to entertain house guests and relatives.
His mother was a very loving person, and I think probably Jimmy got some of his theatrical wants from her. I think she probably influenced Jimmy quite a bit on going into the acting career.
In the summer of 1935, Jimmy's dad got an unexpected break. With the country mired in the Great Depression, Wynton accepted a promotion that moved them all to Santa Monica, California. Jimmy's mother enrolled the shy boy in kindergarten and signed him up for dancing and violin classes as well. The little boy excelled at his lessons with constant encouragement from his mom.
They had this little magic theater that they would play with dolls and act things out. And also the wishing game where he would put something under his pillow at night and she would make it come true. So she sort of inculcated him with a sense of, you know, magical achievement and differentness.
But in the fall of 1939, Jimmy's world was shattered when his mother was diagnosed with cancer. The 8-year-old watched as his vibrant, energetic mom wasted away.
Uncle went and wrote to my mother and said that Mildred was very sick, according to the doctors, that she wasn't going to survive.
For 10 long months, Jimmy suffered helplessly alongside her. His best friend in the world was abandoning him, and he couldn't understand why. On July 14th, 1940, Mildred Dean died. Jimmy and his grandmother went back to Indiana on a train for the funeral. The two accompanied his mother's casket, and at every stop he ran to the luggage car to make sure that it was still on the train. When Wynton insisted that Jimmy stay in the family's hometown with his aunt and Uncle Winslow, the boy burst into tears.
Uncle Winton had spent all his financial resources. He had a lot of medical bills that he had to pay, and he knew that coming back here to Indiana to live with his sister would be the best thing for Jimmy. And I imagine at the time, possibly, he might even thought it would be a temporary thing. That was in 1940. Of course, in 1941, the United States got involved in World War II. Jimmy's dad got drafted. He spent 3 or 4 years in the service.
That rupture meant that he had not only lost his mother, but he had lost his father as well. As a result, he had this kind of lost boy aura about him.
Jimmy tried to find comfort in the rural surroundings, turning to his Aunt Hortense to take his mother's place. And his aunt wanted to make sure the boy felt comfortable in his new home, catering to his every whim. Everyone doted on Jimmy, who was already strikingly beautiful.
They treated Jimmy just like their own child. As a matter of fact, I imagine he probably got treated a little better because, you know, they realized he'd lost his mother, and, you know, he called my mom, Mom, and he called Dad, Mark.
At first, Jimmy found it hard to adapt to the rough and tumble nature of small-town living, but soon he found the fun in farm life.
He helped feed the cattle, and Dad had several hogs at that time, and Jimmy just pestered him to drive a tractor. And then after he learned how to drive it, he was done with that. He was ready to go do something else.
Jimmy enjoyed tinkering with machines. The clean, simple mechanics were a refreshing escape for him. On his 13th birthday, Jimmy's uncle bought him a motorized bike to tool around town. He soon outgrew it and traded it in for a full-fledged motorcycle. The teenager loved the freedom it brought him.
It was called a check, and he'd ride that little sickle all around. He rode it to school. He didn't have a car when he was here.
I'd ride on the back. No place to put your feet, no place to put your hands, but you just hang on the best you could. You know, we were a little bit different. We didn't hang on to the guy in front of us back then. You hang on, you're too macho back then. I don't know what it is.
Jimmy was also very competitive, and along with his emerging athletic abilities, it was the perfect combination for school sports.
We started competing against each other in sports, and that's when I first got to know him.
Jim, he was a go-getter. Of course, he was a star basketball player, too.
You have to remember, in Indiana, basketball is religion, and if you want to be popular, you have to be popular in sports. I mean, it was a huge drive to be popular, to fit in, and that's what you did.
But even as he tried to fit in, Jimmy knew he was different. Dr. James DeWeird, a literate and well-traveled local pastor, recognized Jimmy's uniqueness. The two spent hours together listening to classical music and reading Shakespeare. DeWeird introduced the teenager to some of his own exotic interests, showing him his home movies of bullfighting. The pastor also taught him how to drive and even took him to the Indianapolis 500. Gradually, Jimmy was exposed to a world beyond Fairmount. The sophisticated clergyman embodied everything that Jimmy had lost with his mother's death. DeWeird was an oasis of culture in the rural community who encouraged him to express his artistic bent.
He used to go to Back Creek Church down here with my mom, and he liked to get up in front of people and do things, and Mom would give him these little things to memorize for little Christmas programs and things like that.
Although Jimmy went on to win gold medals for his readings at the Women's Christian Temperance Union conferences, he soon outgrew the religious recitations. He felt ready for real dramas and exploring character development. When his Aunt Hortense insisted that he compete for another church oration prize, the stubborn boy simply stood mute at the podium. Although Jimmy's adopted family loved and supported him, encouraging his ambitions and adventures, they were never quite able to control him.
Jimmy was just full of pranks, like all the high school kids are, except when it came to acting. And he was very serious about his acting. And rightly so, because we all recognized that he had a little bit more talent than anyone of the rest of us.
As Jimmy's love of the theater grew, he spent more and more of his time working on bigger high school productions.
They were doing Frankenstein. So between he and I helped him build this mask. When he got ready to go on stage, I think he took his uncle's jacket or something and turned it backwards. And he had his big old boots that he wore, and he walked stiff-legged and so forth. And he really looked the part. He did a fantastic job on it.
Jimmy was the shining star of his high school, joining the debate team and becoming the president of the Thespians. In his senior year, he played a madman at the state finals of the National Forensic League Drama Contest, screaming and tearing his clothes. His raw, emotional acting overwhelmed the judges and won him first prize. In May of 1949, James Dean graduated from high school, convinced he was born to be an actor. When the war ended in 1945, Jimmy's father, Wynton, had settled back in Los Angeles and remarried. Though the teenage boy and his dad stayed in touch, they were hardly close.
He had a problem with his father that was just a matter of communication. They had been apart since his mother died when he was 9. So he was basically a conflicted personality, needing and resenting.
In 1949, after graduating from high school, Jimmy was eager to get out of Fairmount and decided that his dad was his ticket into college. He came to live with Wynton in L.A., dabbling in drama courses over the summer, but ultimately promising to study law.
The problem is that he had gone to L.A. to study acting, and the father, of course, was horrified. He, wanted him to be a lawyer, go into some kind of practical business like any parent would.
Jimmy's athletic record in high school secured him a place at the local Santa Monica City College, majoring in physical education. It was here that he discovered jazz and became an announcer for the school's radio station. In his sophomore year, Jimmy made a move to UCLA. Although Jimmy and his father disagreed about his future, Wynton made him a deal. He'd buy him a '39 Chevy if Jimmy enrolled in a pre-law schedule of classes. The 19-year-old took the car, then switched to the drama department. His dad hit the roof, and Jimmy hit the road. He loved his father, but he couldn't give up acting. To get out from under Wynton's control, Jimmy pledged a fraternity, just for a place to live. But he couldn't stand all the Sigma Nu rules, and turned to his friend, Bill Bast.
He belonged to a fraternity on campus, and he got into a little fight, and got kicked out. And he came to me and said, we get along so well, what would you say if we, looked for a place together? So we went hunting for a place and wound up taking an apartment in Santa Monica.
Despite the constant upheaval in his life, the 19-year-old snagged the role of Malcolm in the campus production of Macbeth. But Jimmy's self-taught style of acting didn't impress fellow drama students.
He was like straight off an Indiana farm. His diction was just terrible, and he was in Macbeth, and it was being spoken like, a Hoosier farm boy. And it just sort of like he needed more training, etc., and he was in a major role.
The lack of training didn't stop Jimmy's ambitions. He worked hard to get rid of his Midwest accent and make himself more presentable to casting agents. And it worked. Shortly after the play's run, Jimmy landed his first paid job, dancing around a piano in a commercial for Pepsi-Cola.
Pepsi-Cola hits the spot, a big bottle and it's got bounce, 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 bounce.
Wherever the crowd gathers, you're sure to find Pepsi. So why take less when Pepsi's best? Buy Pepsi by the carton.
Then, barely 20 years old, Jimmy scored a starring role as the Apostle John in the Easter Sunday television drama Hill No. 1, about the resurrection of Christ.
It was an excruciating 3 months before it was on television, and he was dying of agony. And I was like, is it ever going to happen? Is it ever going to be broadcast?
I suggest we leave these precincts and go back to Galilee, where we belong.
Good suggestion, Andrew. Well spoken, Andrew.
Now that's wisdom.
Surely we did not spend 3 years following the Master to return again to our nets. Was it for this the Master sent us out to cure the sick, cast out devils?
Must I remind you, John, that the Master is dead, with Roman soldiers pacing at his grave?
He is risen, John. This is the veil that was wrapped around his sacred head. Yet I do not understand.
He will enlighten us, Peter. Come, we must spread these good tidings quickly.
When it was broadcast, a group of some dozen girls or so from Marymount High School formed a fan club and begged to have him come and appear there. And they asked him a lot of personal questions, and then they all lined up and had him sign their autograph books. And they served, you know, Coke and donuts or something, and it was very sweet. It was very funny. But he was extremely nervous.
But for all the attention, Hill No. 1 was a one-shot deal, and with no work on the horizon, the cocky actor became moody and unpredictable.
They were very strange, inward-looking moods, almost impossible to penetrate, and he became very irritable if you tried to penetrate. I mean, more than irritable, annoyed, irascible.
Jimmy would pout for the entire day, affecting everyone around him.
He really never grew up. I mean, he's a 9-year-old, and it's something very appealing in this sort of phantom child, and unfortunately created havoc in his personal life because he reacted to any adult or emotional situations like a 9-year-old.
The $150 Jimmy made doing Hill No. 1 went straight to his landlady, leaving him with little money for food. And his insolent attitude kept getting him fired from jobs, so he depended on his friends, his father, and the Winslows to help him make ends meet. When Jimmy met his roommate's girlfriend, whose family had show business connections, he began dating her in the hope that she might land him a break. Bast was livid and moved out. With no way to pay the rent, Jimmy soon followed. Jimmy found himself competing with other up-and-coming actors, such as Tony Curtis and Tab Hunter. They were all flashing their smiles and strutting their stuff for the few roles available. Jimmy used whatever contacts he could to get ahead. He started parking cars at CBS in hopes of meeting a bigwig.
Jimmy was terribly opportunistic. He saw a possibility for making acquaintances and getting to know people and opening a door, getting inside. He knew how to do all of that and did it well.
One of those acquaintances was a well-connected CBS radio director named Rogers Brackett. The 35-year-old was handsome, cultured, and widely rumored to be homosexual. But that was no concern to Jimmy, whose smooth good looks drew Brackett like a magnet. And the Indiana farm boy loved hanging out with the director's high-flying friends. He and Brackett dined in the best restaurants, attended private screenings, and mingled with the film industry's elite. Within weeks, the 20-year-old moved in with the established director. The two traveled to the bullfights in Tijuana, Mexico, where to Jimmy's delight, a champion toreador gave him the bloody cape. Although Brackett paid Jimmy's way, the cocky young actor wasn't afraid to badmouth him behind his back.
Jimmy described Rogers Brackett as a vampire, and I think, you can read whatever you want into that, but it's sort of questionable who is exploiting who. I think Jimmy was very ambitious and used whatever means he needed to get where he wanted to.
Using his newfound connections, Jimmy appeared on Brackett's radio show, alias Jane Doe. Then he got a guest spot on the TV series Trouble with Father.
When I want to take a girl to dance, I'll ask her, a month ahead of time, so she doesn't want to go, I can ask a couple dozen more.
Well, that's because you don't understand women, son. You got to keep them guessing right up to the last minute.
No kidding?
Sure. Women are peculiar people. Once they feel they can depend on you, then they're not interested anymore. So you got to be completely undependable.
Yeah, I guess so.
But Dean's relationship with Brackett was a stormy one. He continued publicly dating girls while privately antagonizing Brackett's aristocratic friends. His moodiness intensified. He could turn on the charm or sulk and break up an evening with a sudden turn of bad manners. Despite his behavior, Jimmy landed a few speaking parts in feature films, but the often forgettable pictures weren't enough for him. By September of 1951, Jimmy had made the rounds in Hollywood and was once again ready to move on. The studio system was slowly crumbling. Television was gaining popularity, and serious actors who wanted to hone their craft flocked to the center of the fledgling industry, New York City.
His acting coach at UCLA was James Whitmore, and he said to him, if you are serious about acting, you've got to go to New York. There's no way around it. And you've got to get into the theater.
The impatient, ambitious James Dean didn't want to be just another player. He wanted to be a star, and New York was the place to do it. The 20-year-old was willing to risk his emerging career to take a shot at the big time. By the early 1950s, mainstream America was reveling in economic good times, investing in modern kitchens and the newest Chevrolet. But when a down-and-out Jimmy Dean arrived in New York City, an underground counterculture was emerging. For the Midwestern farm boy longing for sophistication, Manhattan was the place to be.
It was only 5 years or so after the war, so everything was kind of up and exciting, and the public's concentration, curiosity began to switch back to different things.
The city was really hopping. It was the early beatniks, bebop, and television was just exploding. It was a very fertile ground for exploring new types, the new psychological type that had arisen, which was the juvenile delinquent.
Jimmy took to roaming the streets till dawn, lurking in the jazz clubs and coffee bars with the beatniks, listening to poetry and the far-out sounds of bebop.
New York City was an exciting place. They made a life for themselves. They would audition in all those theaters off of Times Square. They would audition in the television, and their agents were in the area. You know, it was its own campus, if you like.
He sort of established a group of friends, sort of intellectual friends, Martin Landau, Bill Gunn, you know, a very kind of New York quasi-bohemian set of people.
You know, I could have a meal at the automat, and Jim did this too at a certain point. A hamburger was 25 cents. But I mean, for half a dollar, you could eat like a king. King of the Bowery, but king, no less.
Moving from hotel to hotel and jumping from job to job, Jimmy scraped by. One day, he'd be washing dishes in a midtown tavern. The next, he'd be testing the stunts on the TV game show Beat the Clock.
I was in Mr. Robbins. I was playing Pulver with Henry Fonda. So, I mean, he just thought this was wonderful. And he would wait for me every night at the stage door at 11 o'clock. And I would go to play poker. I loved to play cards. I would play till about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning after the show, you know. And he would sit next to me. He never gambled. He didn't have any money. He didn't have anything. And he used to act like he was watching the poker, but actually he was just, you know, wanted to be with me and all these other actors.
There were a lot of people that now are very well-known actors that were his generation that hung around in these drugstores, that hung around in the bars, you know, in the coffee shops.
Jimmy's bohemian bent didn't land him any acting, but his little boy charm cast a spell on women. One of those women was an aspiring actress and dancer, Liz Sheridan.
We met at the rehearsal club. I was reading a magazine, he was reading a magazine, and we were kind of opposite each other, and he started to mumble, and I started to mumble, and then he read a line from his magazine, and I read a line from mine, and we started doing this sort of game.
The two became inseparable, and within weeks had decided to move into a small Upper West Side hotel together.
We didn't know what to do. We had no money. We couldn't tell anybody. It was the 50s. You just didn't do it, especially as young as we were. And it was just sort of an unheard of thing.
When money got low or he needed something, Jimmy would take a trip back to Indiana, often bringing along his friends for the adventure.
We woke Bill up in the middle of the night. Where are you going? I mean, he was just very upset about the whole thing, but we dragged him with us, and we went over to the New Jersey Turnpike and just stood there and put our thumbs out.
Besides the thrill of the road trip, this time Jimmy had a practical reason for hitchhiking home. His dad was visiting, and Jimmy took advantage of his dental expertise to get his front teeth fixed. It was the first time they had seen each other since Jimmy left Los Angeles.
They were shy and quiet with each other, and there was just a lot of shuffling of feet and a lot of trying to hug each other and a lot of quiet talk. They're very sweet and very country, and probably didn't understand Jimmy too well because he was more artistic.
Good looks were an important part of Jimmy's ambitious plans. His charisma attracted both men and women, and he was learning how to use this power to his advantage. But he knew that looking good and hanging out with actors wasn't enough to make him a star. His career needed a boost. When he heard that Rogers Brackett had moved to town, Jimmy tore himself away from Liz and hooked up again with the CBS director.
He was trying to keep it friendly with Rogers Brackett, but he didn't feel like he should have to give himself to anybody for the price of being an actor. But he did, because he was young and because he didn't know what the hell he was doing really, and because he wanted to be important.
Dean did not respect the bounds of middle-class propriety. The world was here to experiment with. The world was here to live in.
I never saw him ever do anything that was homosexual. And he might have been, he might have not. I couldn't certainly give a yes or no. But whatever, it is symbolic of a terrible burden, a terrible terror, which leads to a terrible unhappiness inside of this individual called Jimmy Dean.
It's indisputable he was an experimenter and that nothing was beyond him, and certainly not beyond him if it was to advance his career. But I think the bottom line is that the love of his life and where all his sexual energy went was toward the camera.
Once again, Brackett helped Jimmy to get small parts on several television dramas. On Studio One, he played a Civil War soldier pardoned by Abraham Lincoln.
The general tells me you've been court-martialed.
Yes, sir.
Sleep on guard.
Yes, sir.
That's a very serious offense.
I know, sir.
What was it?
Couldn't keep awake, sir.
But Jimmy was frustrated that he still wasn't landing any really juicy roles.
In New York, you literally make rounds. You'd walk in and they said, we're doing this out in Queens. You play a soldier tomorrow, you know, and you get a day's work. It was catch as catch can, but it was always with the idea of getting that good one, you know, and particularly a Broadway play or lead on television.
When he did start getting television, it was just dinner is served. You know, it was just one little line and then out. And it was frustrating the hell out of him. He just said, I'm better than this.
As fall approached, Jimmy felt he still wasn't getting anywhere. But with the yearly tryouts for the prestigious Actors Studio coming up, he knew what he had to do. It was time for James Dean to become a real actor. By the summer of 1952, Jimmy was tired of bumming around New York. At 21, he was full of ambition and ready to get serious. The Actors Studio had been established in 1947 by Elia Kazan, preaching the Stanislavski style of acting. When Lee Strasberg became the artistic director a few years later, he established the school's reputation as an actor's refuge.
It was a very emotional place. It was a place that embraced the talent. It was a place where you could be safe, you could try things, you could fall down and nobody says, aha. You know, it wasn't the falling down, it's how you picked yourself up. That was the secret of, you know, challenging yourself.
The school attracted and nurtured a new breed of actor, including Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and Julie Harris.
When you have a school like the Actors Studio, You have a stew of characters and, you know, flavors coming forth that's very exciting, intense, and dynamic. And therefore, you have a community of commonality.
To be accepted in the actor studio was a huge thing. It meant you were not only an actor, you know, you were an artist. You were one of the elite.
One day at his agent's office, Jimmy met another young, ambitious actor, Christine White. She provided a way into the elite school.
He saw Christine White typing up a very kind of like existentialist little play called Ripping Out Layers to Find Roots. And he insinuated himself into it, and he started writing it. And they performed it together, and they were amazingly successful.
Jimmy's performance impressed Strasberg and the other judges. In November of 1952, 21-year-old James Dean beat out 150 other hopefuls, becoming the youngest actor to ever earn a spot in the prestigious workshop.
It was like winning the Academy Award. It was like the difference between nothing and possibility.
Once he'd conquered that, you know, he felt like, well, now, you know, he had climbed the Mount Everest, basically, of acting, and he could do anything.
Jimmy took the method acting technique to the extreme. He became his characters and lived them in his daily life.
He says, you know, Dick, I think the whole secret to acting is not to know the lines too well. I said, what do you mean? He said, because so it looks like you're searching for what you were saying, so it looks real. I said, gee, it might be all right for you. I said, I have to know the lines backwards. I said, otherwise I'm nothing. I could never do it.
He was living his parts on the street. I mean, he would play bullfighting with cabs. He would go in a furniture showroom. He would sit in one of the chairs and, you know, perform, and people in the street would stop, you know, kind of astonished at whatever he was doing.
I think people really misunderstand the method because they think, oh, you live your part. Well, if you lived your part, you'd be insane. And not only that, but I believe that actors pay a tremendous price for acting.
Over the next few months, Jimmy performed in several studio productions, honing his craft. But after an acting workshop, Strasberg criticized the 21-year-old and embarrassed him in front of the class. Jimmy had learned what he wanted, the technique of total immersion in his characters, and he quit the studio for good. Now he had to develop his own style.
Didn't last long with Lee Strasberg. Lee Strasberg, who liked to delve in psychology and tear yourself apart to see where things were coming from and everything. Dean walked out. He said, no, if I tear it apart, I won't be able to put it back together again, and what I got works well.
Like many of the people who were successful, the actor studio, he sort of, you know, really kind of forgot about a lot of the things. I mean, the most famous people in it, himself, Brando, and Marilyn Monroe, really kind of invented their own form of method acting.
Jimmy was forging a new identity for himself and found it through acting.
He basically, you know, had come to the city as something as a bumpkin, going from this hayseed character into the James Dean look. He basically created himself. In New York, he kind of realized how to create, like, his creature, this new type of character.
But no matter how hard Jimmy tried, he still needed help to get where he wanted. Once again, he used the connections he'd made through Rogers Brackett and cozied up to Broadway producer Lemuel Ayres. His new friend fell in love with Jimmy's good looks and offered him a major role in a new play, See the Jaguar.
He played this sort of retarded boy who had been locked away from people by his mother and was almost like an animal. It was a very scary experience for him because he knew this was his first shot at Broadway and it better be good.
Dean felt a personal connection to the part of a teenager trapped in a cage. See the Jaguar opened at the Court Theater on Broadway, December 3rd, 1952. The play wasn't a hit with the critics, but it was a turning point for Jimmy's career.
The play was panned, it closed in 5 days, and the others got respectful reviews, and James Dean was singled out as the shining moment in the play.
Jimmy now had his first success on Broadway. Acting had become his life, and he pushed ahead, never looking back.
Hi. Well, you
sure are hot today.
Well, that's enough for me today, Lou.
What's the matter, Joe? You quitting? Don't you want to try to break me? I still got $34 left.
I'm 18 bucks ahead. Now, that's the trouble with you guys. You want everything all at once. But you got to work for it. Pray.
Pray.
At 22 years old, Jimmy's fresh face appealed to television producers looking to fill teenage roles. In Something for an Empty Briefcase, he was cast as a street thug striving for a better life.
So I want to do something. I want to be somebody so I can hold my head up. I don't want to have to be ducking it every time a cop comes by. Mickey, you see that guy with a briefcase?
Yeah? What about him?
That's what I want to do. I want to carry a briefcase.
They were doing live shows like Studio One in those days, and Suspense and Danger, and they were all done live. It was a big amusement park as far as I was concerned.
By the fall of 1953, Jimmy was featured in television dramas on all 3 major networks. In September, he appeared in the NBC true crime drama, The Big Story.
Honey, what else can we do? You want us to walk away from him, forget like you ever lived?
How much longer I have to fight this thing? When are you going to belong to me? Todd, doing what kids do, that's all dead now. You're my husband, and I share you with no one or anything.
Was my word. Was yours, too, Julie. You promised to help each other the rest of our lives.
Todd, darling, listen to me. Being a kid, it was never good. What could you ever do but dream?
Julie. No, Julie. For me, when you're a kid, sure you dream. Nobody can say for sure it's not going to happen. When you find out it isn't, you're not a kid anymore.
It was live television, and that's probably the hardest medium to work in, because you can't say we'll fix it tomorrow. It's only one time. And the things that happened sometime were absolutely hysterical and frightening, and sometimes comic, sometimes creative. It was a great testing ground.
Jimmy appeared in several more television dramas, invariably playing young men grappling with real-life issues.
Okay. It's everything I do annoys you. I guess you'll be glad to get back to that big city pretty soon.
Paul, you know I'll miss you.
Well, I hope so, honey.
He's absolutely, irresistible to watch. I mean, he's just charming, slightly disturbing and unnerving. He puts a huge flow of sort of energy into these parts that was, eventually to have fruition in the movies.
Oh, Joey. Hey, how's your little boy?
Well, he's got asthma, hasn't he? How'd you expect him to be? You had asthma, how you think you'd be?
No, I was only asking you a civil question.
My wife and me, we were up with him about all night. He just laying there trying to get his breath and, gasping for air. Can't do nothing. Does that answer your question?
The stuff he did on television were young guys trying to buck a system.
And I'm bumping it.
They're guys who come out and literally break through and change things. And Jimmy was the embodiment of that.
But while the jobs were rolling in, Jimmy was getting a bad rap around town. He liked to mumble his way through rehearsals, saving his energy to keep his final performance fresh and spontaneous. His maverick approach infuriated established stars and burned up directors.
Everything was live, so the producers and directors had their hearts in their mouths because he would do many, unscripted things. But, the audiences loved them. What he does in these is he basically takes the character that he's been given and he he you know, adds humor or a certain sort of grotesque quality to the character. He always like tweaks it slightly.
In one of his most moving television performances, Jimmy starred in I'm a Fool with Natalie Wood.
Will you listen to me a minute?
Don't talk.
Well, I gotta tell you
Please
this.
don't talk. Anybody can open his mouth and let words come out. Talk is so cheap. So awfully cheap.
Well, I know that, but this is something that you can't.
It seems so smooth. Like we could get out in the middle of a lake and walk in the water. Doesn't it seem like that to you? Warm and soft, and dark and sweet like an orange.
Oh, Lucy. Lucy, I gotta tell you something. You're not gonna think maybe.
Oh!
Well, I gotta tell you now before the
Here comes Wilbur.
Lucy. Oh, Lucy, Lucy.
Dean was now earning $200 to $300 a show, but he spent it just as fast as he made it. He bounced from apartment to apartment, toting his most cherished possessions: jazz recordings, bongo drums, and an old bullfighter's cape.
He had no money. He didn't seem to worry about where he was going to sleep or how he was going to live. He was constantly sponging from people all the time.
In December of 1953, Dean was cast in a racy new stage play about a marriage torn apart by a homosexual affair, The Immoralist. Once again, Jimmy caused trouble for the director and the cast. He arrived late to rehearsals, changed his delivery in every single scene, and loved to mock the show's leading man, Louis Jourdan.
He did not like working with Louis Jourdan at all. He didn't have a happy time doing The Immoralist.
The Immoralist opened on Broadway in February of 1954. Critics singled out Dean, honoring him with a Daniel Blum Award for the most promising Broadway personality of 1954. But The Immoralist led to an even bigger reward. Director Elia Kazan had just wrapped On the Waterfront and was looking to cast the lead role in his next film. When he came to see Dean in the play, Kazan spotted just the attitude he needed. In March of 1954, a nervous James Dean climbed on a plane carrying everything he owned in 2 paper bags and headed back to Hollywood. But this time, he would be a star. In April of 1954, James Dean signed a $10,000 contract with Warner Brothers to star in Elia Kazan's new film, East of Eden. Dean was set to play teenager Cal Trask, but Kazan had yet to cast the older brother. Paul Newman was brought in for a screen test with Jimmy, and the two seemed to hit it off.
It's a point of whether I go for the girls, though, you know?
Paul, you think the girls go for Jim?
Oh,
Look
great.
Size them up.
Kiss me. Huh? Can't hear.
But the rapport between the actors was not what Kazan was looking for. While the casting dragged on, Jimmy began spinning his wheels around town. With his first paycheck, he bought a motorcycle. But when he raced it across the Warner Brothers lot, Kazan gave him hell.
Kazan had to stop him. The studio had to stop him from using his motorcycle. He was racing and taking chances. Always took chances.
Jimmy defied the studio brass, buying a sports car and speeding along Hollywood's twisty canyons and ridges. Unable to sleep as filming drew near, he often drove the streets of LA until he saw the sunrise. Hanging out all night on the Sunset Strip, Jimmy met Mila Normie, better known as late-night TV horror host Vampira.
He wanted to meet me because I was Vampira. I wanted to meet him because he was from another planet like I was, you know. He was a stranger on this planet. And he, too, he thought he was from some other planet. So I was like his West Coast mother.
In May of 1954, Kazan cast Richard Davalos as Aaron, and production began on East of Eden. Jimmy immersed himself in the role of the son who tries unsuccessfully to earn the love of his father, played by Raymond Massey.
That's for you. And it's all the money you lost in the lettuce business.
Cal, you will have to give it back.
No, I made it for you, Dad. I want you to have it.
I don't want the money, Cal. I couldn't take it.
I'll keep it for you. I'll wrap it up and we'll just keep it in here and then
I'll never take it. Son, I'd be happy if you'd give me something like, well, like your brother's given me. Something honest and human and good. Don't be angry, son.
He was, in fact, very, very close to the character Cal in East of Eden.
Cal!
Really, it was Jimmy to the nth degree.
Talk to me, Father.
He had all these issues with the father, all of this stuff. So really, I think in the end, Kazan saw it almost as kind of a documentary way, documenting his kind of psychological state.
While filming on the Warner Brothers lot, Jimmy was introduced to actress Pierre Angeli. The 23-year-old was drawn to the Italian star's sophistication and elegance. In fact, he was so awestruck that he couldn't even get up the nerve to ask for her phone number. His agent, Dick Clayton, helped him out.
I got it for him. And I brought it out to the studio on a piece of paper. He was talking to Jack Warner, the head of the studio. And I slipped it to him, and he kissed me. Jack Warner didn't know what to make of it.
They fell in love immediately. She was beautiful and angelic and European and a star, and her mother couldn't stand him. So, you know, you have star-crossed lovers, and what could be more irresistible to James Dean than that? You know, it's Romeo and Juliet in Hollywood.
Deeply in love, Jimmy had finally found someone he truly wanted to be with. Hollywood's gossip columns quickly spread news of their affair. That September, he begged Pierre to elope, but the actress refused, fearing her mother's reprisals. Jimmy's world came crumbling down when Pierre told him she could never see him again. Her family preferred a Catholic suitor, pop singer Vic Damone.
Her parents pushed her into the marriage with Vic Damone, and Jimmy stood across the street and cried when she got married. And both of their lives were sort of ruined because they weren't allowed to marry.
3 months later, Jimmy slouched unnoticed in the front row at a sneak preview of East of Eden. Critics in the audience loved the film, but the biggest reaction came from the hundreds of teenagers packed in the balcony.
People were blown away. People were coming out saying, "This guy's unbelievable. Who is he?" I mean, you know, some people were in tears. I mean, it was a major thing for Jimmy to see.
By the end of 1954, Jimmy's career was about to take off. All the elements were there: a great movie role, a teenage audience looking for something new, and a young actor torn by an angst never before seen on the big screen. Although East of Eden had not yet opened for general release, the previews were well received. Everybody around town was telling Jimmy how good he was, and it was going to his head. The 23-year-old was already signed to his next picture when he took photographer Dennis Stock on a wild ride.
It was the first time I'd ever been on a motorcycle. Frightened the hell out of me. I wrapped my arms around his waist and I just screamed in his ear as we took off, "If I go, you go."
The two became fast friends, and Dennis suggested they do a photo essay featuring Jimmy for Life magazine.
I wanted to reenact his life to the best of my ability. I wanted to take him back to his roots, which was the small town in Indiana. And then I wanted to go back to his education in acting, which was New York, and then a bit of Hollywood. And he agreed to it.
They set out on a journey through Jimmy's life. The first stop was the Winslow's farm in Fairmount, Indiana.
We were working like a director and an actor, creating a screenplay as we went along, but it was in documentary fashion. There's one picture that I'm very fond of, which is a profile of Jimmy with the farmhouse behind him and the dog that comes forward and then turns slightly away from Jimmy. The thought of it for me was, you can't go home again. Because what I realized was that this young man was going to be a very big star in Hollywood, and this little town was no place that he could possibly return to. He took me to a graveyard where there was this gravestone that said on it, Cal Dean. Now, this was his great-grandfather. Jimmy's name in East of Eden was Cal. Yeah, and that kind of shocked us. But it's all part of the fabric, you know, of where this type of actor was coming from, yeah? The boy was Marky. It was his young cousin. And they connected beautifully. You saw another side of Jimmy that was calmer, that was without any sign of neurosis, that was just a really, like an older brother. The motorcycle was very much part of his temperament, yeah? And the evolution literally was tractor, motorcycle, Porsche. These were all sort of symbolic roots of what made this guy tick. The furniture shopkeeper sold coffins. And before I know it, Jimmy's jumping into one of the coffins. And I'm shocked. And at the very end, I feel like we're coming to the end. I sort of take a hard look, and he's sitting up now in the coffin, just straight up. And I get that moment of the lost boy, the totally lost boy. For Jimmy's generation of actors, New York City was an exciting place. And we made appointments to meet each other at different times, you know, to catch things that he did in New York, like the Actors Studio, like there was a bar at Jerry's that he hung out at, the drugstore where he met his buddies, the girlfriends that he had there. It was partially the most trying of the times because he was an insomniac and he wasn't reliable when it came to appointments. And my perseverance was really tested to the nth degree. He was searching for, you know, how big a star am I going to be? What should I be owning? What should be symbolic of who I am? Buying a horse, buying a Spider Porsche, having a bigger house, then being ambivalent about it and withdrawing and not seeing anybody. This was not a simple human being that sort of had a straight line of ambition. This was a complicated person who struggled with what makes sense to him or not. And he tested everything along the way.
Coincidentally, Jimmy was still shooting with Dennis in New York when East of Eden was finally ready to premiere. But as the glitterati stepped into the spotlights, suddenly the new star became camera shy. Jimmy quietly slipped out of town and headed back to Hollywood. East of Eden opened across the country in April of 1955, and within days it rocketed to America's #1 spot at the box office. Suddenly, the press was hungry for anything about America's new teen idol, James Dean.
It completely changed his life. He couldn't go anywhere. Women, photographers, everybody swarmed after Jimmy Dean. He became an icon almost immediately, and he loved it. He really did. He pretended he didn't, but he did.
The Warner Brothers mailroom was deluged in fan mail. Tens of thousands of letters, all addressed to James Dean. Teenage America was falling in love with him. Finally, Jimmy was where he wanted to be, on top. But after years of seeking attention, Jimmy couldn't handle his new fame.
People started kissing his ass, and he began, you know, really acting really badly, getting drunk, causing scenes.
He was indulging in an awful lot of stuff that was self-destructive. He got the name, the little bastard, because he was behaving like one around town.
It was that kind of desperation which led to him picking fights with people, recklessly driving, cracking cars up.
You have a person who starves for love and acceptance, and you give him false love and acceptance, he's gonna take it. He's gonna eat it till it comes out of his ears.
Once again, Jimmy alienated the people closest to him, pushing them away when he needed them most.
He also liked disturbing people, upsetting people. You know, it sort of involved them in his own drama, his own ongoing psychological epic.
In a letter to a New York girlfriend, Jimmy poured out his feelings, revealing a tormented soul.
He was really, like, insane. I mean, completely, like, this is sort of written by, you know, like the Wolfman, you know, at the time of the full moon. It's sort of, I don't like it here. I don't like the people here. Must I always be miserable? I try so hard to make people reject me. Why? I don't know where I am. I want to die. I haven't been to bed with nobody. And, you know, it goes on and on. Then he signs it Jim Brando Cliff Dean. And basically, he's sort of himself, the disturbed, you know, teenage werewolf of pop culture.
Millions of teens were identifying with the anguish their new Hollywood star brought to the screen. The old macho heroes were out, and a young new anti-hero was in. Jimmy Dean had given America's misunderstood teenagers permission to cut loose. In the spring of 1955, thousands of girls were chasing Elvis Presley along the Louisiana hayride, and America was rocking around the clock. The teen era had begun. And young director Nicholas Ray wanted to jump on board with his new movie, Rebel Without a Cause. Dean starred with Natalie Wood, Sal Mineo, and Corey Allen in the story of a lonely young man struggling to fit in at a new high school.
There were kids running around wondering what to do with their adolescent energy. We were just looking for something to do. Kids began walking around in stomp boots and red jackets. Everybody looking for the secret that Jimmy seemed to have turned them on to.
Rebel Without a Cause is really a movie about adolescents, made by adolescents, including Nick Ray, for adolescents. And the adolescent, the teenager, was the classic American outsider, or the person that saw themselves, as opposed to adult bourgeois society.
Nicholas Ray decided to cut Jimmy loose to improvise freely while the camera rolled, catching every inflection.
Mom, a kid was killed tonight. I don't see how I can get out of that by pretending that it didn't happen.
Well, you know that you did the wrong thing.
Just tell a little white lie.
You'll learn when you're older, Jim. Stand up!
Rebel Without a Cause shouted out that the old studio system and its moth-eaten stars had better make way for an angry teen revolution.
Rebel Without a Cause would be actually a metaphor for Jimmy and Nick's feelings about the control of the studio system. But what they were looking for was truth in their expression. It was not driven by an interest in achieving a big, you know, bank full of money.
And he also saw, for the first time, that he now was going to be part of this movie-making machine. He was, in other words, going to be part of this film factory of Hollywood.
24-year-old Jimmy was trying to define himself as an artist, but the trappings of fame began to suffocate him.
When he became famous and became the light that all the other bugs grab for, you know, that light. He couldn't take it. Life was not simple anymore. He liked speed, made him feel clean, fresh, was exciting. So he took up racing.
Somehow or other there was a voice inside of him that needed to be drowned out by large sounds. Yeah? Because he really liked to rev the engine, and then in a race, you're not only revving the engine, you're testing the ability to keep the four wheels on the ground and survive.
In the spring of 1955, Dean traded his MG for a much faster Porsche Speedster and began taking friends on hair-raising rides.
First night he got the Speedster, we went up Laurel Canyon, and he just had his pedal to the metal. He would go around blind curves, you know, and by the time we got on Mulholland Drive, he hit some dirt, and the car started sliding, and by the time that car stopped sliding, I mean, I could reach over the side of my passenger side and touch the edge of the mountain. And he was extremely cool about it all, and he said, next time through, I'll get it right to the edge.
With 2 movies under his belt, Jimmy had finally found the stardom he longed for. But friends wondered if he was going too far, too fast. In 1955, Jimmy was tied to a 6-year contract with Warner Brothers, but the 24-year-old's wild side was hard to keep down. He secretly went racing, knowing the studio would be furious if they ever found out. They didn't want anything to happen to their rising star.
He won Santa Barbara, he got a third down at Palm Springs. He was very devoted to whatever he got involved with, whether it was playing the bongos or the guitar, and especially racing, his driving career and what he could do to actually win.
In May of that year, Jimmy took on the most challenging role of his career. Warner Brothers' youngest superstar would play Jet Rink in director George Stevens' production, Giant. Jimmy played a poor Texas cowboy who strikes it rich by discovering oil on his land. But before shooting even began, the young actor felt he needed to find the roots of his character. An authentic Texan, Bob Hinkle, was already working with leading man Rock Hudson.
He came in and he said, I'd like to have you work with me. He said, I'd like to be a Texan 24 hours a day. I said, to really be a Texan, you know, they walk a certain way, and they talk like I'm talking now, and they dress like I'm, you know, I dressed like this before it was fashionable.
Unlike his co-stars, Jimmy fit into his character like an old worn pair of jeans.
Rock, when he'd get off of the set, he'd go right back. He's Rock Hudson at night. He didn't talk with an accent. He dressed up in his casual clothes. So did Liz and all the rest of them. But old Jimmy'd wear his old boots and jeans and stuff like that.
Jimmy and Bob Hinkle became inseparable, even taking trips to watch the bullfights.
Down in Del Rio, right across the border in Mexico, in Villacuña, Jimmy and I shared a bed. And I've heard a lot of rumors about, you know, that he was gay, but I feel like if he'd have been gay, I'd have got a look or two or something, because we just wore boxer shorts and we just slept in the bed right there together in a little small bed.
Although Jimmy's character, Jet Rink, becomes a huge success, he forever holds a grudge against the established Benedict family. Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor led the all-star cast, which included Mercedes McCambridge, Dennis Hopper, and Jane Withers.
My welcome in, babe.
Fine.
Why, that's wonderful, Jen.
I'm rich, babe. I'm a rich one. I'm a rich boy. Me, I'm gonna have more money than you ever thought you could have. You and all the rest of you stinking sons of Benedicts.
Leslie, you go out in the house.
Jack, we're real glad you struck him. Now you go on along home.
Oh, my, you sure do look pretty, Miss Leslie. You always did look pretty.
Just pretty nigh good enough to eat.
He just thought this was the greatest thing in the world to get to work with George Stevens. He'd heard so much about him, he'd seen his pictures and the work and knew of his reputation, and he was excited about it.
But Jimmy found that the well-established director had an extremely rigid working philosophy.
George Stevens had his way that he wanted done, and he didn't want actors or actresses coming up with their own ideas, and Jimmy didn't like that.
He was a mighty superior being, that George Stevens. And he saw this surly little runt who didn't comb his hair and wore dirty clothes and dared to have an ego. He was very affronted. He didn't like him.
Everybody was scared to death of him. See, but a lot of people, they try to book at him, you know, and he didn't like that.
It was 115 in the shade, and it was unbelievably hot, and it was very uncomfortable for a lot of people, and that can show in your attitude and in a lot of things, I think.
They had a bad habit of calling people in, make them stay all day, and then he would get to them 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, they'd just give out, see, and this finally got to Jimmy.
The last straw came one late afternoon as Jimmy was working on a scene with Stevens.
George took the cameraman and myself and Jimmy, and we went out there to where they was going to shoot the little Rieta scene. George takes a back page out of his script, and he tears it into a bunch of little pieces. And he gets up and he goes about 10 feet, and he puts a little piece down and puts a rock on it. Goes a little further. Jimmy said, "What the hell is he doing?" I said, "I don't have no idea." He'd go a little further. About 30, 40 feet out there, he put those little things there. He said, "You think you can follow that line?" Jimmy said, "Yeah, I think I can." He said, "Roll them cameras and let's see." Jimmy walked over there at that first piece of paper, bent over, picked it up, wadded it up, and threw that rock over there and went to the next piece. George said, "Cut." Jimmy picked up every one of them. And he walked back over there, right over to George, and he just dropped all them pieces of paper right in George's lap. He said, "Now let me tell you something. If I need a marker," says, "I'll put it down myself."
Mercifully for Jimmy, production in Texas ended the next week. The cast and crew partied their way back to Hollywood on a chartered train.
We left seemed like it was about 7 or 8, and nobody went to bed. I don't think anybody got in their bed. They all was, you know, we had guitars going and singing, and all the whiskey and everything you wanted to drink, anything you wanted to, 3 or 4 bartenders. And it wasn't nothing but a party.
Back at the Warner Brothers studios, Jimmy continued shooting the final scenes of the movie, but the change in scenery didn't ease the tension on the set.
He had quite an attitude. Jimmy was just plain flat stubborn, not only on the set but off the set, and very demanding about a lot of things, and I just felt he was getting too big for his britches.
It started building up a little bit there. They'd bring him in a little early and keep him and wouldn't shoot till late that afternoon, and it'd make Jimmy mad. So one day he decided he didn't want to work. He called me and said, "I'm not coming in today." I said, "What do you mean?" "Yeah, you know," he said, "Hell, I'm not coming in." He said, "Them guys called me in there yesterday and I didn't work till 4:30, so I said, give out, I couldn't even do my work."
When it was time for Jimmy's scene, Stevens went looking for his star.
He said, "Where is Jimmy?" I said, "I haven't seen him." I didn't want to lie to him, tell him I didn't know where he is. I just told him, I said, "I haven't seen him today." And then here comes Liz. "Where's Jimmy?" And I told her, I said, "Well, he's home." She said, "We got to go get him." So we jump in my car, we drive out there to Sherman Oaks. He lived right off of Van Nuys Boulevard in Ventura. We drive out there and he's sitting laying out there in the sun. He's got giant shut down.
Jimmy's relationship with Stevens was already tense, but his failure to show up for work was the final straw. The iconoclastic actor was ostracized by the director.
And he made a big speech to the whole company. He said, "Mercedes McCambridge broke her leg and she's here on crutches. But this one, Jimmy, he couldn't be here." For the last 30 days, nobody would talk to him. He'd arrive at work and nobody would say hello or good morning. They made him up in silence. They dressed him in silence. They combed his hair in silence. Everybody hated him. They were told to show their disgust, and they did.
After Jimmy was finished filming in September of 1955, he was eager to get back to his daredevil racing. It would be a refreshing change from the arduous production. Ironically, the California Highway Patrol asked the hot-rodding actor to speak to teens about safe driving in a public service announcement with Gig Young.
How fast will your car go?
Oh, an honest miles an hour. Clocked, it run about 106, 7.
You've won a few races, haven't you?
Oh, 1 or 2.
Where?
Well, I showed pretty good at Palm Springs. I ran a Bakersfield. People say racing is dangerous, but I'll take my chances on the track any day than on a highway. Well, Gig, I think I'd better take off.
Oh, wait a minute, Jimmy. One more question. Do you have any special advice for the young people who drive?
Take it easy driving. The life you might save might be mine. You know?
With production on Giant nearly complete, Jimmy decided to disregard the studio's rules and go back to his car racing. He quickly traded in his Porsche Speedster for a brand new model, the 550 Spider at Competition Motors in Hollywood. Car customizer George Barris helped Jimmy personalize the new car.
He brought the car to my plant in North Hollywood, and we wanted to put the numbers on. But I said, I got to put something on here that's traditionally you. And we start putting on Little Bastard.